particularly excited that we get to host Archer tonight. I've had the pleasure of hearing him speak a number of times, and he's always very entertaining, even though he gives good, serious face. So for those of you who are not as familiar with Archer, here's a little bit about his background. Archer Mayer has written 29 best-selling Joe Gunther novels based on his actual experience in the field. Over the past 30 years, he has worked or continues to work as a firefighter EMT, a police officer, and a death investigator for Vermont's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Mayer's diverse careers in other fields also inform his books. A graduate of Yale, he has been a scholar, editor, researcher, and photographer, as well as a political advance man and a medical illustrator. In 2016, the author received the Robert B. Parker Award, named for the Dean of Mystery Writers. He has also received Vermont Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts, and the New York Times calls Archer Mayer the boss man on procedures. So you guys are in for a treat. Without further ado, we're going to hand it over to Archer.
Thank you all for coming. I know you're expecting someone else, but too bad. Stuck with me. The latest book is called Bury the Lead. You can call it Bury the Lead, like my editor did in New York City. I used to think he was an educated man, but apparently not. But it is Bury the Lead, and so I actually went overboard, and after you've bought the obligatory 6 hardback books, because you're not allowed to leave otherwise, you didn't hear about that. But now you have, there is, before the book begins and before the acknowledgments and before everything else, there is a single sheet of paper that explains all about Bury the Lead. And by the time you finish that, and if you want to continue reading the rest of the book, then you're a better person than I. But you will absolutely know everything about the phrase "bury the lead" at the end of reading that one page. Okay, if you don't, stop reading altogether. This is book number 20-something. 9. Thank you, 29. Who's counting? That's right, number 30. I'm finished number 30. I'm editing it as we speak. So that's fresh in my head. I have no idea what Bury the Lead is about, but we'll fake it for the next few minutes. I guess in a way that's only half a joke, because all of these books that I write are done basically always by the seat of my pants. And the reason for that is that I don't want to hidebound myself with some sort of idea that I haven't yet researched or verified by finding out what real people do out in the world, because I just make stuff up. So instead of setting out a plot or having a hardcore idea, I just have a sort of a vague assemblage of questions. Mostly because of those other jobs that were rattled off. I spend a lot of time in other people's misery on a regular basis. In fact, we call this the silver bell, for it tolls for thee. At least my daughter does. And so when you're dead, that goes off, and I get to spend quality time with you. Because I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things, and before that, rescue calls, and and then as a cop, I specialized in sex crimes against children. So, thousands of these exposures later, I get it. We're terrible people. We do terrible things on a terribly regular basis, but nevertheless, we have interesting backgrounds, and I get to visit all of you under high stressors. And so for me, who's a frustrated cultural anthropologist, I get to sort of watch and take notes and steal your stuff when you're not looking and interview you in odd contexts. And then in addition, I might find that you do something interesting, like before you died, you were a nuclear scientist, or you were a garbage truck operator, and I know nothing about either one. So I will find out about that, and I'll go to your job, and as part of the investigation, I'll also meet you. And then I'll say, okay, I'll be back, because actually what you do is kind of interesting. So I'll be wearing a different hat then. You won't have to tell me the truth. You can make stuff up, and I won't arrest you. This time I'll be a novelist, and you can tell me all your pent-up frustrations, and when I ask you about that red button that says do not push under any circumstances, we can pretend we're going to push it, and you can tell me what happens. And on down the lines. I actually had a conversation like that with a guy who ran a nuclear plant. That was an odd conversation. I never went back to the place afterwards. But that's how I get informed. And that information then begins to direct me as I write the books. So I end up writing them the way you read them, one page at a time. And just as you have no idea where you're going from page to page, sad to say, I also have no idea where I'm going as I go page to page. But it begins to sort of figure itself out in my head. And of course I get to change stuff, which you can't. If you read my book and you don't like my book, you're stuck with it. That's all there is to it. But if I read my book and I don't like my book, I get to edit it. So I change things and fool them around. And once in a blue moon, I've done this maybe 2 or 3 times, I actually changed the bad guy. Because I finish reading the book and I go, you know, it just didn't work. It just doesn't have the right feel to it. This bad guy is not bad enough or properly stimulated enough. But there's got to be someone else in this story that fits the grade. And believe it or not, I mean, I've done this, like I said, more than once. You go into it and you just a couple of changes. You'd think you'd have to rewrite half the book. No. Just a little tweak here, a little touch there, and boom, you got a new bad guy. With the additional reward for me personally is that I come up to events like this, and someone comes up to me and says, I never guessed that who's the bad guy was. Well, me neither. So, you know, the reward is doubly rich. The point being, in a funny kind of way, is that we are co-storytellers in this process. That's how I see us. And the reason I do is because I began as a reader, funnily enough. And it was important for me to be engaged by the writer, and that my intellect, my imagination, my curiosity, my thirst for knowledge, that all that be rewarded by the writer. So when I read, I enter a contract with the writer, and the contract better be solid all the way to the end, or I'm going to realize I spent $24 on this hardback and the son of a gun led me down a primrose path. Unacceptable. And I've never forgotten that as a writer. So I enter into a contract with you, and I will do everything I can to honor that by giving you fun and excitement and information and empathy and all sorts of stuff that I can bring out, because I realize that if you're anything like I was, when you begin that reading process, you forget who the author is. You forget that you're acquiring knowledge by printed words on a white piece of paper. What you've done is you've turned a movie on in your head. You can hear stuff, you can smell stuff, you know the colors of stuff even though they're not described in the book itself. And you bring all that alive. That's you. I don't describe, for example, the main character in this series of books, if you have no idea who I am, is Joe Gunther. Well, Joe Gunther is not described really at all in most of the books that I've written. You do that. You have an idea of what he looks like. To my horror, some people say, oh, he looks just like you. Good God almighty, no. But I don't even know what he looks like. He's a voice in my head, and I don't really have to worry about what he looks like, because that's your part. And I don't want to mess that up. Now, a lot of people say, well, what happens, you know, if you get so lucky as to get a movie deal? I go, when was the last time you went to a movie, you didn't like it, and you blame the author of the original book? So, you know, I'm fine, you're fine, we'll all be fine, don't worry about it, you know. And who cares if it's Danny DeVito, you know? Let's hope he had a good time doing it. You know? So that's sort of how I do what I do. In this particular book, of which I have a vague memory, we start, suitably for me, with an autopsy, because autopsy is one of my favorite places to be. Consider ourselves duffel bags after all. You know, you zip it open and you find all this really cool stuff, and it's all interconnected and it all makes us tick, and there's never been a machine that even comes close to working as comprehensively as this does. So that's pretty wonderful. And taking it apart is even better. They're not complaining after all. They better not be complaining. Let's put it that way. Anyhow, so this starts with an autopsy because we found a young woman in distress, i.e. dead. And so we run her through the process, and that's where we begin to unfold or lay bare the layers of discovery. And that's part of what I love about life in general, is finding stuff out. So we will discover, of course, that she died of an unnatural causes, what they used to call misadventure. Remember that? So quaint. I wish we could use some of the old phrases we used to have. She dies by misadventure. We begin to sort of figure out how that came about. We immediately locate a suspect. We arrest the suspect. And last but not least, we get a confession. And that's all by something like page 12. So we're good. It's a short story. You paid a lot of money for it, you know, but you're off the hooks, and that's it. Well, unfortunately, there's more writing, as you'll discover when you turn the page. So, well, of course, this actually has happened to me, admittedly, on very rare occasions, but you actually get people who cop to crimes they didn't commit. I mean, the first thing that occurs to you when you're an investigator is to say, what are you, stupid? But maybe it's this time of year right now where a lot of my fellow Vermonters are aching for 3 hots and a cot, which is their word for jail. And I used to, in the old days when I transported prisoners, this is way back in my salad years, you know, the guys would actually sometimes we'd team them up because they're so benign, what the hell. So you put 2 or 3 in the back seat, drive them up to prison, and they're catching up with each other. And they make sure that whatever crime they committed only gets them about 3, 4, 5, 6 months in jail. When it comes out, the weather will be really good, and they can get back to, you know, work, whatever that may be, as they define it. We don't define it as that. That's criminal activity, but they see it as work, and it all works out because we're going to encounter each other once again. When the leaves fall out of the trees, they'll be back in the back seat again, and we'll be having the same conversation. Okay, so there are those types. Well, you'll witness such a type at the beginning of this book, but it's a Joe Gunther book, so that type is not stupid, he's anguished. So he must have a reason for doing what he's doing, and thus unfolds the tale. I'll tell you no more than that. Except to say that a friend of mine, erstwhile law enforcement, as I'm just about to become, comes up to me, and he's gotten a honey of a job. He's one of the top guys running the security department for CNS Warehouse, which is this gigantic, or to quote my daughter, ginormous, sort of retail warehouse for groceries that supplies half the United States. It's a $30 billion a year company, which most people don't realize. And if you analyze this kind of operation, it is a hotspot for theft and misadventure, to use that word again, because there's tons and tons and tons of things coming in one door and going out the other door in 18-wheelers and being handled by the lowest common denominator in between, because everyone's on minimum wage and they all have sketchy backgrounds, or many of them do. And most of these guys, 99% of them, salt of the earth. 1 percentile makes them all look bad. And those are the guys that I used to get called in to examine and chase down. Well, anyhow, my buddy is running the security for this operation, and it has thousands of employees. And they are in these warehouses that are 70 feet high, filled with stacks, loaded with beeping little electric carts that are carrying stuff, high lows and motorized vehicles of a sort, all electric. It's a beehive, in other words, and it's dangerous. And he began to tell me, as head of security, how I could knock down this line of house, kill maybe 20 to 30 people, how I could burn up this part of the building, which the smoke would then be ventilated through and knock off a few other people, how I could take this device and short circuit this particular part of it, right, like this, and make it burst into flame. And on went the day. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, now I know why they hired him for security, because this guy's dangerous, for God's sake. You know, he was a bomb disposal expert when we worked together in the trenches, so there was just one of these kind of, it's all coming clear. And then he pulled out his Rolodex and he introduced me to all the movers and shakers in this $30 billion a year company. And they were all on board. Oh, yeah, I love your books. Great fun. Oh, sure, absolutely. We'll tell you how to destroy our company. So we all got in together, interview after interview. And of course, the first thing I do, you know, doff my hat in a polite way and say, okay, we will make up a company. I will take all your information and we'll blow that company up, okay? It doesn't exist, it's not real. So they were totally on board with that. So now there's a miniature CNS warehouse in White River Junction. Hard put to find it. Well, don't worry about it because I'll destroy it anyhow. So there it is, and we have a lot of fun, and it's all based on research. Because the stuff I apply to that is stuff that the real guys told me all about. So that's the neat part of this world, is that I can, actually I was kidding with one of you guys earlier on about the fact that I was trained as a historian and I used to write history books. The frustration was, in your research you'd find someone really interesting, but they wouldn't be quite interesting enough. So as their biographer you'd go, oh, for God's sake, you could have done that. Well, now I get to do that because I'm still doing the research, I'm still doing the background, I'm still doing all the stuff I did as a historian, but I get to lie if I need to. So that's in here too. And last but not least, who's familiar with Willie Kunkel? Okay, most of you, a lot of you know about Willie Kunkel. Willie Kunkel, of course, is, I mean, to say that he's physically handicapped because of a bad arm is barely to touch the surface. I mean, this man is a sociopath, but he's on our side. So he's one of the good sociopaths. I had a young man walk up to me a couple of years ago, and he said, I have Willie's arm. Well, that, of course, leads to a conversation I won't bore you with. You now getting to know me, you can imagine I went off on an angle, and it was a little weird. But we got back to the topic at hand, which was his arm. What happened? He said, well, 20 years ago I was mugged and stabbed high up in the arm, and it destroyed the same nerve bundle that the sniper bullet destroyed in Willie's case. And I went, far out, you know, and I'm looking at him now. Of course, only people like me can get away with this. Most of the time I'm looking at you and you're half, you know, crippled or something. Oh, that's really cool. And of course he's agreeing. But so we began to discuss about his infirmity, and he said, you know, I love your books, I love Willie Kunkel for obvious reasons, I associate with him, but you missed something. I went, cool, this is exactly what I want to hear. What did I miss? And he said, these wounds are evolutionary. They don't stop. You don't catch a bullet 20 years ago and just park your hand in your pocket and live the rest of your life tweedledee. Wounds come and go. You cut yourself, it bleeds, it heals, it scabs, it scars, the scar builds up, the scar goes down. We've all seen that. I mean, you caught a scar on your hand when you were kids, right? And now you look at that same scar, it's a hint of what it used to be. That's the nature of scar tissue. Well, if your scar tissue is in the inside of your body and it was explosive in nature, such as a bullet going in and shattering a bone, and this was 20 years ago, and it just went all through the wound field in that way, well, yeah, they open you up and they hose you out and they sew you up and they go, okay, well, you know, sorry about that, have a nice day. With the passage of time, these microscopic bone fragments have not been removed, they haven't been addressed. And in the old days, 20 years ago, they didn't know anything about that. Well, that stuff festers. and it's not good for you. And after a while, with the scar tissue expanding and changing and, believe it or not, receding, that's also directional. So that can do as much damage in the receding process as it can in the expansion process. So that hits Willie in Bury the Lead Lead. So I couldn't resist. That was just too much. So I immediately finished my conversation with the young man who had suffered the injury and made him a proofreader. So I said, okay, down the line, when I finish the book, I'll send you this passage of the book, and you can tell me if I got it right or not. So that happened eventually. But in the short term, I called up Mike. My brother, exactly right, the retired orthopedic surgeon who, like all orthopedic surgeons, is physically incapable of the phrase, I don't know. So I called up Mike and he went, oh, sure. What are we talking about? And I said, bullet injuries to this part of the body. And I keep pointing that, it's actually over there on Willie, but who cares? And my brother had actually done some of this in kind of a peripheral way. More to the point is that my brother is aging very well. So now he knows enough to pick up the phone and call in other people who may be slightly more up to date on this. And the next thing I knew, we had a room full of people who were highly qualified and very experienced in these kind of injury redressment procedures. And we began to sort of revisit what should we do to Willie now? Because Willie, recovering alcoholic, PTSD, combat veteran, he's not a good patient. Call me crazy, but he's really cranky. And when he gets cranky, as you can well imagine, illegal things might occur. So he's right on the edge. And here's this guy, we've got him to the threshold of happiness. Very boring place to be. He's got his girlfriend, he's got his child, he's got his house, he waters the lawn, he does everything just right. Well, that can't last, not in my world. So he develops pain in this old injury site that on a scale of 1 to 10 is the proverbial 15. And because of that, and the pain, remember the guy who approached me and said, I got his arm? He described the pain as the equivalent of having a 220 volt wire shoved into your head. He said, it hurts like, and he fill in any blank you want to fill in. Apparently it's excruciating. And so I visited that on Willie, and you can imagine Willie does not handle this particularly gracefully. But we managed to muckle onto him, put him in the hospital, and we put him through a 14-hour-long operation, which I try to describe in the most entertaining way I can. So I hope you'll enjoy that part of the book too. But there's another example, is if you set out, oh, okay, I'm going to write a murder mystery, you're actually going to put in soldier shoulder surgery. Say that 3 times fast. You're not. Unless you write the way I do, in which case, oh, it fits perfectly, because it's ideal to one of my characters. It absolutely progresses the story forward, and it plays in with the overall fact that none of my stories are particularly linear. In other words, that whole concept that I was playing with earlier about, good guy, bad guy, dead guy, car chase, end of story, okay? No, not in my world, because my world is just like yours. You set out every day with a purpose in mind, and you get screwed within the first 15 minutes, right? Because the phone rings, or your mother falls down and says, I can't get up. But whatever it is, life goes, and that's true 7 days a week. So my guys are no different. So now all of a sudden, Willie's in a jam. Joe didn't need Willie to be in a jam, but he is in a jam, and on we go down the line. So that's very much true in this book. It's even more true in the book I just finished writing, which is called Bomber's Moon. This title got me into trouble. Everyone loves Bomber's Moon, so I think I'm safe this time. I'm not going to get any callbacks from my attitudinal editor in New York. Actually, I think I ruined him so much with this one that he'd take anything. Mud flaps. Good. It's okay. It's fine. We'll just put blood on the cover. It'll work. So Okay, this is where I officially run out of gas. You're all here. Some of you know the drill. This is a question-answer situation, or a really prolonged silence, which I hope won't be the case. Who's got a question? Let's get the ball rolling. Sir.
So you were talking Chester, right? Well,
Yeah.
I had not read any of your books at that point. I just finished number 29. And
Oh my God.
they've been very.
There's a 12-step program.
You mentioned no movie deals, but when are we going to see a series on Netflix?
Well, sooner the better. I hope. I'm under contract right now, so hopes. Well, not the Netflix, and you know what it's like being under contract in the movies. It's like 6 feet under in a mafia movie. I don't know what's going to be real or not. We like the people. The contract wasn't written in invisible ink, so everyone's, right now, we're all in love. What can I tell you, baby? They all call each other baby, so I'm trying to get into that. So there is a movie contract, and where it will go and what it'll result in, I don't know. I've already put my foot down and said that only Paul Newman can play, Joe Gunther, and there is an odd silence on the phone. It seems like I've missed something, but and they haven't asked me to contribute any more creative ideas, which is probably a good idea. John Grisham said, "Take the money and run" when it comes to movie deals, and I will. My personality is such that I won't be able to sort of look over their shoulders, so I'm going to try to angle for a little bit more involvement than just that. Plus, he can take more money than I'll ever dream of and run, so that's the other reasons I want to find out. So what are you going to do with Joe Gunther? Now, I don't expect that their Joe Gunther will be our Joe Gunther. I'm not going down that road. I write the books. I give them to you. Your imagination fleshes them out. We're all going to be disappointed when we go to the movies, right? But we will be going to the movies, so that's cool. That's good. Wish me well there. So of course it won't be the movies either. It'll be some downloadable thing. Twitter will get into movie making. I don't know. I can't keep track of this anymore. But the good news is there are so many outlets for movies nowadays that, for all I know, your landline's going to download movies. You'll be seeing it in that little round thing you put up to your ear. I'm lost. But I hope I'll be employed, if lost, by the movie business. So we'll see. We'll see. I hope they'll turn it into a series. I don't even know that much. This is very early on. So, 15 years from now, I may be able to finish this story for you, or there's no way of telling. But it's fun. It's fun. It's entertaining. Yes.
I've been fortunate. I'm a flatlander. I live in Maryland. I came up here to be with my daughter who lives here in Vermont, and she and her husband introduced me to your books about 6 years ago. And
2 points. You live in the right place, and you have excellent taste in literature. Very well done.
Right. And where I live in Maryland has a great public library, so I was able to find many of the first 15 books with, anyhow, long story. It strikes me that particularly in this book, Joe Gunther is sort of mellowed. He's kind of slowed down. He's kind of, the way he interacts with Willie is just, it's more. He's not as indulgent. He's more direct, but he's kind of like time matters. And
yeah.
I don't know. Am I missing that, or?
No, I get impatient with my grandchildren too. I just say, okay.
Yeah.
That's something I might say. I always get lost. It's just one of these aging things.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that Joe Gunther is, what is he, about 104? Something like that. I mean, he was nearing retirement in 1988. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I don't know. People. Of course, they're like you. I mean, they find my books, they read them all in a week, all 29 of them. They're up to date. I have no clue what I wrote last year, much less, 30 years ago. So the whole sort of world view of being inside Joe Gunther, I'm about as clueless as, I would be if I were, a visitor to Mongolia. So I I write sort of where I'm at the moment, and I'm not quite sure how or if or why that I visit what Joe Gunther's up to, but that's probably true to a realistic sense. And but then again, I write the book, and then they take a year to publish a book. So now we're 2-3 years out of date, and I have no clue. You know, I know I'm wearing the same clothes because I never change them. But as for the rest of my personality, God knows. You know, I'm a quirky guy.
I do want to thank you for the geography lessons of Vermont.
Oh, that's from the get-go. Place was character. You know, it went back to the old thing, and everyone's going to go, oh, yeah, I know what he's talking about, for once. You meet each other at a social engagement or something. Anyhow, you meet someone you haven't met before, and you shake hands or not. And within probably the first 4 minutes, it's going to come out just as, do we know where this gentleman comes from? We do. Why? Because that's what we say to each other. And I would imagine that we've been doing this anthropologically forever. Oh, I come from the cave on the top of the hill. Oh, we're not supposed to like you people. You know, that kind of exchange. We always go geographically. So I had that in my mind because I am extraordinarily geographical. Before I became a knot on a dead piece of wood in Vermont, unmovable and forever placid, I was a world traveler. I lived in 30 different places on 3 different continents, and I never stayed put. And I come from parentage that was so restless we all thought they had criminal records. So it was just in the bloodstream to move. And I guess I became sensitive to the fact that I didn't come from anywhere. I could assimilate everywhere. I can get along with anybody, which is really good if you're a cop, by the way. You know, it doesn't matter if the guy's got blood dripping off him. You know, it's, hey, how you doing? Bad day. I thought from the get-go that not only am I going to invent a cast of characters that we will care about and invest in, because I started this series as a series, but they will come from somewhere, and that somewhere will be the state that embraced me and the state that has the same kind of three-dimensionality as the people it bred, and that there is a connection and a sort of empathy between a place and its denizens. And that I've never given up on. I love what Vermont does for me and maybe what I could do for it. And also it's just kind of neat. All these nooks and crannies and all this stuff. Margot, my wife, and I had dinner at Bentley's, before here. Most expensive cup of soup I've ever had. There's a writer's comment. Oh, she's putting on an attitude. You can see me later in the alley. I'll be the one with a knife. But I took a break, go upstairs, use the men's room. Well, of course, you don't just go upstairs, use the men's room. You go up and you nose around. And it's a cool old building. And then all of a sudden, it's not Bentley's and it's not the soup. It's a nifty old New England building, and this all of a sudden becomes a nifty old New England town with a history and whatnot, and who cares what it is now or what its reputation might be. What's that?
There used to be the morgue up there.
Well, there you go. See, there used to be a morgue up there, so naturally I went upstairs. Must have been something in the air. I don't know. You know, those residual nose functions. So that's just what I need to do in this series of books. I always, if I've written a chapter or two and I haven't gotten geographical enough or a sense of place enough, I always go back and fill that in. And of course, that's the beauty of writing the way I do, is that when I finish writing the first manuscript, I'm only halfway done. And you rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and you mold and you play, and I throw it to Margot, and then I have to rewrite the whole bloody book after she's finished with it, because like, really, you know, thought you could get away with that. So I've got about anywhere from 5 to 8 standard editors, law enforcement, lawyers, scientists, doctor types, whoever, and I use all of them, including the world's most boring grammarian, because by God, she knows syntax. You know, nothing else. And the other ones, they wouldn't know syntax if they had to shake it off their ankle, but they do know police procedural stuff or whatever. So I pick and choose from all these guys. Some of them, like the guy with a bad arm, I sent him the section. He didn't want the whole bloody book. He didn't like murder mysteries. I spare him. I'll give him 15 pages, you know, but the right 15 pages. And that's how you construct these things and how you start bringing life into them and energy. Because I guess the punchline to all this, from a guy who can't carry a note, is that this is music. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's got sort of themes to it. It's got a rhythm and a cadence. When I write every single sentence in these books, which I, as I pointed out, rewrite and rewrite, I do it by ear. Because the guy who traveled all over the world the way I did never took English. So I wouldn't know a dangling participle if it hit me in the head. But I know how to spell it, though. And I know how to use it inside of a sentence. I know how to hear a language and how I want your brains to hear that language as you're reading. And that's the extra thing, is yeah, you give them a good story, yeah, you ignite a movie in their heads, but every once in a while it's okay to interrupt the fictional daydream to make the reader pause and go, oh, that's actually eloquent. Because there is that sense that we possess the deepest, broadest language on the face of the earth. It's astonishingly flexible and available to us. We don't use it much, but those of us who fuss with it on a regular basis, as a wall builder would fuss with concrete, they know the aggregate differences, they know the viscosity, they know that this stuff is not static. Language can be molded and phrased and selected from, and don't just tell something. Try to go beyond that. And I do that in all my emails. I do that to notes that I write to people. It doesn't matter. I'll pause and I'll think and I'll pick and choose among the words. What's the sound of that? What's the rhythm and cadence of it? And then the recipient of even an email might even subconsciously go, wow, that was a good note to get. And similarly, I'd like to think these are fun books to read, not just because of their context, or because of where they're placed, or because of their subject matter, but just because I hope they occasionally, if I'm lucky, they use language well. Anyhow.
So if you wanted to give this book, Bury the Lead, as a Christmas gift, not knowing if someone had ever read a Joe Gunther novel, heaven forbid, is it okay to jump into this
Sure.
at the 29th book, having not had the rest of the series?
Sure you can. Sure you can. No,
It's a single.
I write this book in a series of books. Oh, the question, I see someone in the back going, what? The question was, can you read the series out of order? And can you, in fact, read Bury the Lead? Well, yes, it's a hardback, for God's sake, so buy 6 copies. Absolutely start with this one, because if you hate it, then at least I got the $25 out of you. No, the point being is that writers of a series should be well informed that when you write for publishers are only interested in the bottom line, and if you're not selling to their expectations, they'll put you out of print. Well, I began 1,000 years ago, and in my salad years, there was no guarantee that I could make a living at this. So I made sure to train myself that every book I wrote, even within the series, would be a freestanding novel. So these people will be explained to you. Now, there's a catch to that, and that is that someone else in the room, Mr. Junkie here, for example, he's read it all. Okay, so he does not want to read book 29 and see the same paragraph that I wrote for books number 12, 16, 18, 22, and 27, describing where Joe Gunther was born or brought up, okay, because that's lazy on my part and irritating for him. So the tried and the true, they need to be rewarded from book to book to book to book with different phraseologies, with a little bit extra, something that you may not have learned from some of the other books. A perfect example of this was in one book, for example, I revealed that Willie Kunkel is a hell of an artist. Well, where's that come from? You go, oh my God. Well, that's perfectly conceivable. I may have all sorts of tricks of the trade you have no idea about. Like I have a full woodworking shop right next to my office. Well, oh my God, he's a woodworker. So these things can come out of nowhere. And those, the longtime guys will be rewarded with, and you won't know one way or the other. Okay, you say, well, of course he's a woodworker or an artist or whatever. So the answer to your question is yes, absolutely, you can read them out of context. But this is my possibly third manipulation of my answer, and that is that if you read them in order, you get the extra reward of an evolution of character, entanglement, and interaction. These people grow. And there's something there that you can only gain if you read the entire series in sequence. It's not a game breaker. It's just an extra that you'll get out of it. So read this one and then start at the beginning. And make it a habit you simply cannot break. Yes, sir.
One thing about Joe Gunther, though, once you've read one of his books, like, you're waiting for the next one.
Well, thank you very much. Me too. Yeah, it's funny. People say to me, well, where do you get your ideas? You know, and do you ever sort of like go, oh God, what do I do now? The answer is never. I mean, and here is actually is kind of, you may have noticed now, I'm full of pompous answers. So here's another one. One of the things I noticed was that these stories, since they're lacking Arnold Schwarzenegger or other people speaking in strange accents, they're about us. Joe Gunther, the name was chosen because it was the single most boring name I could think of. Because like all of our names, well, not my name, but you know, other people wander around, they're all named Sue or Beth or Mary or John or Frank or, you know, whatever. We're normal people. We do normal stuff. We drive normal cars. When we get into a fight, we bleed and hurt or whatever. That's the world I wanted to write about. And therefore, the stories I write about are plucked from, God forbid, the Valley News or the Brattleboro Reformer or whatever. Not.
You brought the names being interesting. I know a lot of the names you have in your book are real people.
Yeah, they are.
Reading one of your books, ran across one of my friends in there.
I know.
The hooker and junkie named Brattleboro in your book.
I know, it screws you up, doesn't it? Yeah. That's the one downside. So the comment was that in the series of books, you occasionally locals will run into real people's names, and I have to admit, that's shameless. It's true, and there'll be at least 8 people in every single book that are real people.
The reason I ask you, are you still doing that?
Yes.
I would like to be in one of your books.
Yeah. But here's this is the way you do it. You have to enter in an auction for a good cause. Okay, no flag burners, please. Like KKK. Other flag burners, I don't know, depending on the flag. We'll have to negotiate about that. But I do, hospitals and libraries and veterinarian clinic, and, you name it. There's so many good causes there that are worth supporting. So people contact me and they say, "You still doing this crazy auction thing?" And I went, "Yes." And thankfully, I set the rules precisely from the very, very start, which was, give me your name. I get to do anything I want with it. And very early on in my career, some guy went, "Oh yeah, no, that's fine." I went, you're missing that I said, look, I have a dead crack whore, and you just gave me your grandmother's name. And all of a sudden there's this, "Oh, that's what you meant?" No, "Yeah, don't put her in anyhow." So I try to be gentle, but I'm not always. Every once in a while, you got that character and you don't have a name, and so you got to plug them in. So there they are. Once in a blue moon, someone thinks I got the name and I didn't get the name, and says, "Well, I won that auction." I said, "Did you tell anyone?" That's a clue. So it screws up, but not often. And I've now done hundreds of these names in various novels. The weird downside is, for people like you, of course, you're reading the book, the fictional daydream is alive and well, right? You're visualizing all these people, and all of a sudden a real person's name pops out of nowhere, and you go, "They wouldn't do that."
They're nice people. Tonight. You'd hope to be here.
What's that?
If it wasn't one of your books, you'd hope to be here tonight too.
Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. Well, of course, that's the other thing. People come up to me and say, "I'm Mary Jones." And I go, "So what?" But I'm your character. When I got 8 or 9 or 15 characters, I don't know who you are, and I have no idea what I did to you. So there is that little disconnect. A long, long time ago, it used to be you win the name, and you have dinner with the author. I would find someone better than me for that. But anyhow, I mean, I have already touched on the fact that some people are a little eccentric. Some people are downright unpleasant. Some of those people can occasionally win one of these auctions. And I'm stuck all dinner with them. So we put an end to that part of the deal. Now there's no dinner. I just get the name. Thank you very much. Don't want to know you. Don't want to meet you. Yeah. So.
How many names per book are auctioned?
It's a sliding scale because obviously it depends. I don't go out for them. People just reach out and say, "Hey, we got a cause or we got a winner or whatnot." So I would say, gosh, a minimum might be 6, and the worst the best I ever did was something like 12 names. On that point, 12, I was thinking to myself, and God, maybe I'll just put them all in an elevator and cut the cord. What am I going to do with all these people? I mean, for God's sake. So that was a little awkward. So I'm trying to calm down a little bit, as if I were capable of that. And I average maybe 8, something like 6 to 8, something like that.
How did you hook up with your publisher?
Oh, that actually, how did I hook up with my publisher is the easiest answer in the world. They hook up with each other. I got employed in 1988 by somebody. And then they go out of business, they sell each other to each other, they merge, they subsume, they change nationalities. I mean, I've had 5, 6, God knows how many different publishers. I've never had to ask anybody about any of that. They just sort of bring me along. So I have no clue. Now, any knowledge as to how I went about that predates the invention of DNA. So I'm not the guy to come to say, "How do I get published?" Oh, I don't know. I don't even have a smartphone, which always struck me as a contradiction in terms. So I'm a dinosaur. I do things the old-fashioned way. I use a computer to type, but otherwise I've got 3 manual typewriters in my house. And like I said, the closest I get to all this electronic world is I have a flip phone, which is always off, unless I'm standing over a dead body, and then I call the office and they've got another one for you. That's it. No one ever, the only time I'll ever see a message on that phone is from AT&T trying to sell me something. You hit delete, that's that. So it's nice and unencumbered. But God, people now apparently get books published on the internet. There are all sorts of strange and fabulous things you can do. I'm blessedly ignorant of all of them. Having said that, I also am a pragmatist, and I try to keep my eye on the marketplace and on my own viability as a business. And thank God Margot's runs most of that. So that's the business side, and I'm the entertainment. But between the two of us, what we managed to do is take these 29 books, which most of which should be out of print. That's what happens in the publishing world. But you don't get sorry, you get even. So I would reach out to those old publishers, whoever they were at the time, and say to them, well, if you're going to put it out of print, for God's sake, just give it to me, because it's a waste. It's stupid. I'll take care of it. And in the old ignorant days, before ebooks and such, they all went, oh yeah, sure, whatever. So we were able to latch on to 18 of the first books. And they're the black paperbacks. Where's Vanna White when I need one? Okay. Those are published by us. So we turn out all the black-clad paperbacks because otherwise they wouldn't be available. Period. And you would not be a junkie, for which I make no apologies whatsoever. I even took the jacket art. The photographs were taken by yours truly. Yet another life I had a long time ago. So, any other questions? We've run out of gas. Oh, no, one last question. Go ahead.
So between Open Season and Bury Your Lead, I'm sure that we've seen an evolution in the technology in crime scene investigation.
Yes.
And how much of that has driven you in your work?
Oh, it's yeah. The question has to do with technology from 1988 on up to the present. I do absolutely pay attention to that stuff because that's the stuff I think you think is neat. And I, of course, it fueled my job back when I was very active. And I also think it's fascinating. So, I mean, this foolish shows on TV that all have IS in it, they're popular for good reason, all this stuff, the gear. I mean, for God's sake, never leave home without it, So, when I wrote Open Season, DNA was not being pursued in the United States. That book, nevertheless, talks about blood analysis, and we do it by cross-matching. And I did that because I drove down to University of New Haven, talked to Robert Genslin, who was then editor-in-chief of the Journal of Forensic Medicine, the Science, and he and I, sitting together at his desk, talked about the case being analyzed in Open Season, and he's writing these notes and sliding them across the table at me while we're building this blood profile of this suspect. And I shoved all that into the book. And the very next year, American law enforcement and cleared the courts and all the rest began to accept DNA as probatory. So it went from there. And as a result, I went from there. And more nifty stuff, to the point where Bomber's Moon, next year's book, is going to have the latest and greatest now on a lot of the crime scenes that I go to. The state police will do this. I don't fool if you don't want me near fancy equipment. But they've set up the Faro, F-A-R-O camera technique and system. It's a complicated thing, but you put a tripod in about 3 or 4 different places in this kind of environment, and you put a camera on it, it does complete sweeps and then cross connects all that computer-driven data into a single program and gives you a three-dimensional image of this environment into which you can go anywhere and look at anything. And since it's a high-resolution camera, if, for example, during the investigation we missed this little detail there, you can get it later. I mean, you've returned the premises to the owner. Let's say the crime happened here and we got to return it to the bookseller. We can go back there and go, well, now hang on. So I've got that in Bomber's Moon. So we can visit that technology. And that's what we use on car crashes. So when I get called to a car death, I and the guys will set up their equipment and we'll begin to work the case together. And sometimes I have to leave the body in situ while we get that fully documented before I can remove it and then do my investigation to find out what did it in, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this dance that goes on. It's highly technical and terribly rewarding. And so, yeah, I will absolutely throw that stuff into the series of books if I possibly can, if it makes sense. And it's neat stuff, and the evolution has been extraordinary, and this state is fabulous for that, thanks to a guy to whom I dedicate this particular book named Eric Buell, who sadly died of cancer right after he retired as the head of the Vermont Crime Lab. Now, this was his baby, a quieter, more self-effacing, quasi-invisible, nerdy-looking guy you can't imagine. That he was a positive powerhouse, and he made the Vermont Crime Lab into an entity it could have only dreamt about. And because he had this very peaceful way of getting to the right person in the right way, get the money lined up with the technology and whatnot, and he actually changed part of the building in which they all reside and built this 3-story tall, beautiful structure, jammed with all the latest and greatest with room for expansion. So, as weird as it sounds, Vermont, lowly Woodstock, Vermont, has one of the best crime labs in the Northeast. You don't have much crime, so they're like us. Okay, waiting for something here, you know. But it's a great facility, and it's a nice reflection on Eric. It certainly makes our life easier because these guys, God, they just love playing with the equipment.
I wish they had tours. I wish you could tour the building.
Yeah. In the old days, of course, people like me get to do that for fun, but I don't know what the what the protocols are. That's probably true that you're not allowed to do that. Well, I have a feeling I've run out my welcome. You've lasted a lot longer than most people, certainly all members of my family. I thank you very much. And I'll sign whatever you got.